Okay, we are live and on the air. And today I would like to talk about the social contract and service and what it means to be a servant or even a slave, and how the concept of servitude changes with time and in different languages. So, before I do all that, I am going to be my own assistant. I'm going to go over to my other computer and I'm going to try to share the link to this broadcast on my Facebook so that hopefully some more people will watch. So please bear with me as I try to figure out how to work two computers at the same time. And I have birds here. I have all sorts of people. Okay, so I am now going to see whether I can see my own broadcast on my channel so I can share it. Oh, I have a security alert. A new device is signed on to my account. Yes, I know. That's me. Don't be angry about that. Let me share my link. It's okay. It says to check the activity. Let's see what happens when I do that. Yes, I recognize this activity. You're all set. Okay. Maybe now they will let me share it. Can I at least see my channel broadcasting? No, I can't see it. So I'm just going to share my channel. Maybe I would have to sign out in order to be able to see it. And I could sign in as my other self. Oh yeah, I can see it now. Well, this must not be very interesting for other people to watch, but now I'm going to share. Okay, I'm going to silence this. All right. So here we are. I have attempted to share with my Facebook friends. And yeah, I was told in no uncertain terms that I need to show at least half my torso, otherwise it's unprofessional. Okay, you see, I have half a torso. Okay, so we're going to talk about response that I got with regard to the minimum wage. And here's my overall impression of this person. I don't know who it is. This person calls him or herself a U.S. slave. And I'm going to read you what they wrote in just a minute. I read it before, but you know what? When you first read a comment to something you said and they don't agree with you, sometimes you kind of are defensive and you forget to listen. And I think to a certain extent, I only listened to half the things that this person said, and then I immediately responded. And we all do that, and I'm sorry. So I'm going to listen better as I read to you what the person said. But let me tell you what my initial red hot impression was. And later I kind of changed my mind. But my initial impression was that this person wanted to have the minimum wage higher because this person is an employee and this person believes in the social contract. And he was under the mistaken impression that I, at some point, was a young person working at minimum wage. And minimum wage, what he's trying to say is it should be fair. Minimum wage used to be worth a great deal more. This is true. Due to inflation, what happened was that the money that was allocated to minimum wage, while it was more and more and more money, it was worth less and less and less. Okay, so there's an element of truth there. Of course, what contributes to this inflation and devaluation of that money is the very fact that there is a minimum wage. It's not the only contribution. Of course, it's not. The Fed setting interest rates very, very low is also part of it. Printing more money is part of it. You know, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not just minimum wage. And if that is the point that that person was trying to make, I don't want to, degrade that point. But the other part of it was he was assuming that I had a nice minimum wage at the time when I was a young person. And it's not fair to other young people now that they don't have an equally nice minimum wage. Of course, he goes back to a time when there was a minimum wage, and he doesn't go back to a time when there wasn't one. And if we're really going to be fair about it, and if there's really going to be a social contract, it needs to be the same for everybody. And we should not change the rules in mid-game. So if you come into this world and you're helpless and you're a baby and everybody treats you a certain way, and then you're a child, then you're a teenager, you have the right to expect that when you're an adult, when you're a person who has worked half his or her life, and you have a certain amount of money, that money will also continue to have the same value. So this is, I think, I'm going to now go and look at the comment and read it again. But I think this was what was behind the comment that was made. It was like, oh, you used to be young and you had things this way, and now you're old and you want things a different way. And this is actually a social contract argument. I'm not crazy about the social contract argument at all because none of us signed a contract. But to the extent that it makes any sense at all, it should mean that the game is played by the same rules throughout one's life. So that it's not like, oh, you have to stand at the end of the line when you're a child. And then when you're an adult, you also end up having to stand at the end of the line. But when you were a child, you were told, hey, when you're an adult, you get to do this. You get to be at the beginning of the line. Okay, so that's just a line metaphor that doesn't even work in places where nobody has to stand in line. But okay, so I am now whoops. kind of lost my view of what we're doing here. Okay, here we are. Okay, what I want to do is I wanted to share my screen with you. And in order to do that, I don't know, it's kind of harder for me to do on the Chrome. So let me see if it will allow me to share the screen. Okay, so I'm going to go share the screen. And now I need to go and look at what I want to look at. And hopefully you guys can see this. I don't have a person verifying for me that they can see what I'm seeing. And I am now looking at the video. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen, but what I need to do is I need to go down and share the part where this is hand-eye coordination problems, by the way. I just do not know how to go down on this Chrome to get to the comments. So what I want to show is the minimum wage situation.
An ad
there.
of Proposition B in Missouri that apparently.
But what it won't let me do, and then I want to talk about the servant in my grandparents' house. But the problem with that is that I'm not really familiar with this particular computer. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go over to the other computer and I'm going to read you the comment. And if you want to go and look at the comment, that comment is found on my minimum wage video. So here we go. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at my minimum wage video, and I'm going to read you this comment from U.S. Slave. So U.S. Slave says, maybe I can kind of look at you while I'm reading it. Oh dear. Well, that's the problem. I'm still waiting for the battery to arrive. Okay, you read what U.S. Slave said because I can't right now. So U.S. Slave said, look, the reason minimum wage has gone up, the reason we need it to go up is because the value of the dollar has gone down. There's inflation, and the things that happened in California are not all due to hiking the minimum wage up, which I agree. Of course, there are a lot of other things that made life in California unbearable, but all of them have to do with interventions in the free market, and all of them have to do with doing things that made the money not go as far. So the price of living in California the cost of living is terrible, and people can't afford to live there. And hiking the minimum wage there is going to not make it any better. But the other thing that he said to me was, look, when you were young, you worked at the minimum wage, And now that you're older, you don't want to give minimum wage to other people. Well, okay, what did I do when I was young? When I was 16, I went to college. When I was 19, I went to law school. I didn't get a chance to work as a very young person. When I finally graduated from law school and passed the bar, eventually, I wrote a novel. The name of the novel is called The Few Who Count. And in this novel, I explain why the corporate entity is in violation of free enterprise, because there shouldn't be limited liability. And if you want to know why, you might want to read Nassim Taleb's book, Skin in the Game, because it explains it. In order for anybody to run a corporation in a good way, that person needs to have skin in the game. But right now, the people who run the corporations are elected by stockholders, and the stockholders have no skin in the game, or not enough skin in the game, because all they lose is their investment, and nobody can sue them for everything else. And you know, when you're running your own business, you have everything at stake. It's not just that you invest and you might lose what you invested. You might go into debt. You might go into so much debt that you'll become a servant or a slave. And in order for a corporation to work really, really well, that has to be hanging over the head of the person who runs it, the way it does for sole proprietorship. Now, I didn't get a job as a lawyer after I passed the bar. Eventually, I opened my own law practice, and I worked for less than minimum wage. And you're going to say, how's that possible? Lawyers don't work for less than minimum wage. It was my own business. I didn't always have clients. When I had clients, I worked very hard for them. My clients were poor, but I wasn't working pro bono. You know, a lot of what lawyers say, they said, oh, I contribute to society. I'm kind to the poor. I work for them for free. And I've seen those lawyers who work for free for the poor. They don't represent the poor. They do whatever they think is right. They don't represent their client. I really represented my clients, and I charged them fees that they could actually pay. So I was living off my clients. My clients were poor. I was poor. I mean, I owned a house. There was a mortgage, but I owned a house. I operated out of my house, and I worked. If you look at the number of hours that I worked and how much I was paid, it was way, way, way less than minimum wage. And anytime an independent person starts a business, it's going to be like that. And so for you to assume that all of society is benefiting from a minimum wage arrangement, that I shouldn't begrudge minimum wage to a young person today because I had that when I was young. I did not have that when I was young. I did not. So what should the social contract be? And what does it mean to be a slave? And I did have a page open that I wanted to share with you about semantic shift. And again, I don't know if this will allow me to do that. So I'm going to look at the page without necessarily sharing it with you, but I'll try to share it a little bit later. So if you go to the link that I gave you below, there's an article that I wrote a long time ago. It's called Semantic Shift and the Concept of Servitude. And it starts out like this. Terms of servitude and related concepts demonstrate a cross-linguistic tendency to shift due to a pejorization of the idea of service. Positive and negative meanings of the term for the master-servant relation can sometimes coincide, as seen in Kings 1:9-22, where the word eved is used twice in the same verse, once meaning slave, a lowly and disgraceful position, and the second time meaning a servant of the king, which included the king's closest advisors. There is no indication of awareness that the same word is used. And so I'm reading you that, I'm going to now read you that verse in the original from Kings 1, 9:22. ובני ישראל לא נתן שלמה עבד, כי הם אנשי המלחמה ועבדיו ושריו ושלישיו ושרי רכבו ופרשיו. And what does this mean? Solomon did not make slave servants of the children of Israel, because they were the men of war and his slave servants and his ministers and his deputies and the ministers of his chariots and his horsemen. Now I'll see if I can screen share that without losing everything. Can you see that now? I hope that you can. Okay, so umivnei Israel lo natan Shlomo Eved, or sometimes it's pointed as Aved, ki hem anshe hamilchama ve'avadav ve'sarav ve'shalishav ve'sarei richvo ufarashav. Okay, so the word Eved is here, and the word avadav means his servant. So this is the word for slave servant. This is the word for and this part is his slave servants. Okay, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, I'm back. Okay, that kind of worked, I hope. Okay, so what's happening here is the word for servant, really, what does the word for servant mean? It means someone who serves someone else. In what capacity can you serve someone else? Well, you can serve someone else in a very lowly capacity or in a very high capacity. In Vacuum County, I play a lot with those ideas because while Nabal was a master of servants, it really turns out that he was also a servant of the people. So, service, is that a bad thing? Is it something that degrades people? Is it something that they should be paid extra for? Is it something that we all do in society? We serve each other, you know, from the lowly waitress at your McDonald's to the President of the United States. Do we all serve a purpose? Is it all part of a social contract? And if there were a social contract, what would it say? Well, I think that while this person who calls himself a slave believes that there should be a social contract, and the social contract should say that we should have the same rules for everyone, I think he's mistaken about changing the value of the dollar as a way of solving this problem. And there's also a lot of anger. If you read that, if you read the comment, there's an anger against this person's employer or boss who goes to these charity dinners and sits there and has a meal that costs $100. I can't look at it right now, so I don't remember. But there's an anger at the person who is above him. So he feels like a slave. He feels that he can't say no to his master, and he wants to take it out by changing the rules in mid-game. Well, not changing the rules in mid-game would be, of course, not playing with the currency, not interfering or intervening in master-servant relationships as they are constituted between consenting adults. But we can even talk about slaves. You know, it's such a taboo thing to talk about, but let's be real about it. We all come into this world as helpless little infants, and we don't own ourselves at the time of birth. And for a very long time, an infant is completely dictated to by the caretaker. Now, this is perfectly reasonable and rational. I mean, I've seen people go around saying, well, you should ask an infant whether he wants to have his diaper changed. And if the infant doesn't want to, you shouldn't change his diaper because he should own himself. No. Okay. At that point in a person's life, that person is not equipped to take care of himself or to make decisions about his own life, his own well-being, his health. That's why we have parents or other caretakers who make decisions for us. We take care of our infants and we do not ask them exactly what they want. Now, over time, this changes. And as a child develops, the more developed the child is, the more autonomy the child has, and at the same time, the more responsibility for taking care of himself. So that in our society at 18, we emancipate them. Now, we don't emancipate them all at once. We don't take a little infant and say, oh, now you're free, go take care of yourself. We give them some time to learn how to live. And by the time they are emancipated, they've probably been able to take care of themselves for quite a bit of time. They've already learned how to do these things. And so when we set them free and they go out into the world, hopefully they can take care of themselves. And this was certainly true when children were put into apprenticeships and were asked to work around the house and asked to participate and to help out. And to a certain extent, every person started out as a servant of his parents, you know, having to take orders, having to learn from others, having to compromise what he wanted for the sake of what other people said he should do. And then eventually, you get better at things and your parents let you make more decisions for yourself. And if your parents are over controlling, you rebel. And eventually you're your own person. And that's good. But at that time, you still don't have a lot of economic strength, a lot of economic power. So you start at, most people, you know, not everyone, starts at the bottom and has to work his way up. And what would be good for a social contract, if we were going to have that concept, is that the dollar will be worth the same when you're an elderly person as it is when you're a young person. So that if you do work and save up some money, that money will be there for you in your old age. And as we go up the rungs of the ladder, we learn what it's like not just to be a child, not just to be a servant, not just to be a slave, but also what it means to be free, what the downside of being free is, what it's like to be hungry because you didn't earn the money you needed to make a living, what it's like to wish you had more stuff. And eventually you might become an employer. You might employ other people. You might become a parent and you might be responsible for other people. And one of the good things about this is because it happens gradually and we go through the different rungs in the ladder slowly, usually, we have a chance to understand and to have sympathy for other people. So there's a proverb in the Bible about a servant when he reigneth. And of course, the idea is if you emancipate someone who's only ever been a servant and suddenly make him king, that person hasn't learned patience, has not learned how to rule, has not learned noblesse oblige. And so that person is going to be a terrible king. He's going to be a terrible ruler. He's going to be a terrible master because he hasn't had the opportunity to experience what it is to occupy different places on the rung. And sometimes children think that being an adult means you get to eat candy every day and you get to do everything you want to do. And if you emancipated a very small toddler and made him king, then that would not be good. So we go through life, we occupy different places. I've been a child and I've been a mother. And now, talking to my own mother, I can imagine what she was through, what she went through when I was a child. And so it helps, it helps for our emotional growth to occupy these different rungs in the ladder and to understand what it's like to be that other person. But look at US slave. US slave acts as if, we're born in a certain position and we stay in that position throughout our life. He doesn't do that in terms of being an employee, but it's almost as though this person went out into the world, occupied the lowest rung of society as an adult, and never got out of that rung. Okay, so this person is still an employee and is very resentful of his employer, has never gotten a chance to be an employer himself, and therefore has a bias against employers. He thinks that employers are people who go to social events where the food is very expensive and they get to pretend that they're engaging in charity when they're not. They're just hobnobbing with other rich people. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. That's one of the problems with having corporations with no skin in the game. That's one of the problems with having the masters not being the owners of the business. So yeah, there is a problem, US slave. There's a huge problem. But the problem isn't the institution of slavery. It's not the institution of childhood versus adulthood. It's not about, the different rungs in the ladder. There's nothing wrong with all of those rungs if you climb them in a free market. What is wrong is if people who are at the top never topple, if they don't have anything at risk. So I suggest that if you don't want to read my book, The Few Who Count, although I would love for you to read my book, you might read Nassim Taleb's book, which I just finished listening to on Audible, called Skin in the Game. And I will be talking about this on my other channel with some friends Friday night, which is tomorrow night. We'll have a live stream where I'm not the only talking head. So what about the concept of servants in our houses? I don't know if you've noticed, but part of the problem with the middle class right now is that, at least unless you're very high middle class, most of the middle class has lost its servants. There are no servants in our homes. We have to clean up after ourselves most of the time. And most people do not even ask their children to help with that, which is, it used to be that, oh my goodness. What I suggest that you read also is hold on. أني اللايف ستريم أطلت سريعت باللايف ستريم. Okay. So there was something else I wanted to share. And the thing I wanted to share relates to this photo. In this photo, you see my father as a small child, and you see this young woman. And you might think, and I thought a very long time, that I thought, but it wasn't my grandmother. It was, and she was a wonderful person. And you can read about that article that I referenced below. Now, somebody appears to need me very much. So I am going to sign off and broadcast and talk to you later about service, servitude.